So, a single announcement from the White House recently sent absolute shockwaves through India's tech sector. In this explainer, we're going to break down what exactly happened with the H-1B visa, what it really means for the future, and try to figure out, was this a political attack or a really calculated economic power play?
And it all kicked off with this statement. I mean, it doesn't get much more direct than that, does it? A really blunt, aggressive message aimed squarely at foreign workers that, well, it pretty much set the stage for all the panic that was about to come.
And this is exactly why that statement felt like a direct message to India. Just look at these numbers. Indian nationals make up over 70%, 70 of all H-1B visa holders. So you can see how any change to this program is going to overwhelmingly impact them. And then came this number, the number that caused absolute chaos. The proposal, which was floated by the U.S. Commerce Secretary, was for a new $100,000 annual fee for every single H-1B visa renewal. Now, just to put that in perspective, right now it's around $5,000 every 3 years. So you can imagine, the reaction was just immediate and widespread panic. But then, just a few hours later, after, a period of just intense confusion and anxiety for hundreds of thousands of people, the story took a very, very sharp turn. A critical clarification was issued by the White House, and it completely changed the entire narrative. So it turns out the reality was completely different from that initial threat. The official word confirmed it was a one-time fee, not annual. Huge difference. And it would only apply to new applicants starting way out in February 2026. And maybe most importantly, if you're an existing visa holder, you and your renewals would not be affected at all. Phew. This one clarification basically neutralized about 90% of the threat right there. So, okay, the immediate crisis was over. The panic died down, but it left everyone asking the same thing. Was this just a massive communication screw-up? Or was there a deliberate strategy behind creating this level of panic and confusion in the first place? And this is where we really move from the what happened to the why. When you start looking at the timing and the bigger picture, it becomes pretty clear this was probably less of a blunder and more of a really calculated move to achieve some other strategic goals. See, this announcement wasn't made in a vacuum. It came just 2 days before India's commerce minister was scheduled to land in the U.S. for some really critical trade negotiations. For a while now, the U.S. has been pushing India for major concessions, especially on agricultural and dairy imports. So this move, it looks a lot like a classic pressure tactic, right? A way to gain some serious leverage before the talks even began. To really get inside the U.S. government's mindset here, you kind of have to look at its history with another major rising power, China. There's a really powerful argument to be made that the U.S. is determined not to repeat what it sees as mistakes it made decades ago. Think back to the early 2000s. The U.S. was actively helping China join the World Trade Organization. And at that time, the trade deficit between the two countries was at $83 billion. It seemed, manageable. But you fast forward to 2018, and that deficit had just exploded to over $418 billion. From the U.S. perspective, it had basically helped create a massive economic rival. So strategically, the U.S. is now doing everything it can to prevent a rising India from following that exact same path and challenging its economic dominance. And that's why this H-1B visa threat isn't just some isolated event. It's one tool in a much larger geopolitical toolkit. We're seeing the U.S. also strengthening ties with Pakistan, threatening sanctions over India's oil purchases from Russia, and even publicly putting India and Pakistan on an equal footing. It's all part of this broader strategy to manage India's growth and, well, keep it in check. All right, so how did India respond to all this pressure? Did they concede? Nope. They doubled down on a really powerful, long-term strategic vision of their own. In a major speech right after all this happened, Prime Minister Narendra Modi basically reframed the entire issue as a national wake-up call. He argued that India's greatest vulnerability wasn't some external threat, but its own economic dependency on other nations. And this vision, it's backed by some unbelievably ambitious numbers. India's Commerce Ministry has set a formal goal to grow the economy from $4 trillion today to $30 trillion by 2047. To even get close to that, you'd need a sustained GDP growth rate of over 9% a year. It's a clear signal. We're going to create opportunities right here at home. Okay, so that's the high-level geopolitical chess game. But what does all of this actually mean for the markets, for investors, for you if you're a tech professional? How does this play out on a practical level? Well, in the short term, the consensus was that we'd see a small dip in IT stocks, maybe less than 5%, but definitely not a crash. That clarification really prevented a disaster. But there's a potential ripple effect in sectors like real estate, which relies pretty heavily on income from those overseas tech workers. And of course, this kind of geopolitical stuff always creates a bit of temporary volatility in the overall market. And here's where it gets really interesting, a fascinating little wrinkle. Just before this news broke, foreign institutional investors were holding massive short positions. They were essentially betting that the market was going to fall. They were already at 92% short. This has led a lot of analysts to ask, who knew what and when? It kind of suggests some big players might have seen this volatility coming. So, if you're a long-term investor, the advice is pretty clear. First, expect this short-term noise and volatility. But the fundamental story of India's consumption-based economy and its crazy growth targets, that remains unchanged. The key is not to make decisions based on panic from scary headlines and maybe even see any big dips as a potential buying opportunity. And all of this leaves us with one final, really provocative question. This whole episode was a stark reminder of India's economic dependencies. So, will that vulnerability become its biggest risk, the thing that holds it back, or could this external pressure be the exact catalyst needed to spark a whole new wave of domestic innovation and self-reliance and actually accelerate its rise?